proceeds for costs incurred before the inducement resolution. However, developers could use other sources such as LIHTC equity to cover those costs. Therefore, the recommendation is that for 4% non-volume cap LIHTC applications, to add a new threshold requirement to provide supporting evidence and documentation that the proposed project has obtained necessary zoning and 201H approvals. The second proposal and recommendation to assist in speeding up the processing of applications is to amend policy 2 of the QAP by adding that the inability to show that the applicant is registered to do business in the state of Hawaii will result in the rejection of the application and 6-month resubmission penalty. The third area is the statewide delivery of units. The subcommittee proposed reducing the county income adjuster from 4 points to 2 points to facilitate rental housing development in Honolulu. Some developers expressed concern that the HUD income limits on the neighbor islands are lower. If 4 points is too much, is 2 points too little? So the recommendation is that the 2-point reduction might be too drastic. Therefore, reduce the county income adjuster from 4 points to 3 points to facilitate development statewide. Other QAP policy recommendations are to clarify that, again, the ACT rehab of an existing building not used for housing, that is adaptive reuse, that the building must not have been used for housing for 10 consecutive years prior to acquisition. The second proposal is to ensure alignment with HHFDC policies and priorities, require 4% LIHTC applicants to use the revised consolidated application, which corresponds with the revised QAP. Non-compliance will result in the rejection of the application and a 6-month resubmission penalty. And the third and final recommendation is to prevent the deliberate manipulation of the consolidated application, to prohibit the submission of unauthorized form of the application. So add a new policy that non-compliance will result in rejection of the application and a 6-month resubmission penalty. These recommendations are purposefully broad to give staff the latitude to make any necessary amendments that are technical in nature and facilitate implementation. As staff received and continues to receive comments on specific provisions of the QAP, I think the intent of the subcommittee is to allow staff to propose additional revisions to the QAP, which are aligned with the overall policies to, number one, speed up the delivery of affordable rental housing statewide, and to more efficiently use HHFDC financing resources. I think the subcommittee made it very clear that they really appreciate the knowledge, professionalism, and commitment of the housing finance staff, and that's really namely Jocelyn Iwamasa, Patrick Inoue, and Mark. And they really did appreciate the participation and candid engagement of developer stakeholders in this undertaking. That concludes the overview of the subcommittee's report. We're available for questions, comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Well, I got a comment and question. Wow, the committee really worked hard, and the staff. A lot of changes. Hats goes off to all the people that was involved. So Janice, I got a question. you mentioned about, there's maybe several downsides, but one of them where the developer might have to come up with more upfront monies or funding.
Yes.
Yes, how would that impact, or would that impact the current developers uh, that the ones that we currently use, and prevent outside or mainland developers from coming in because of the monies now that they might not have to fund the project that they would need the funding for upfront.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion, Director Kaheli, on that. I think while they would not be able to use bond proceeds, because the inducement resolution would not have been issued, but they could use LIHTC equity to cover those costs. So they will have to upfront it, but they would have to upfront it anyway, but they would be able to use LIHTC proceeds to cover those costs.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kahel.
Any other questions?
This question is maybe for Jocelyn, but it has to do with these proposed recommendations. One of the concerns I heard is that it could delay developers from coming in to apply for bond 4% financing. What impacts in terms of time, if any, would these proposed changes have for those types of applications?
Hold on.
So sorry, I was at my desk and I don't have the mic going because of the construction, so I had to run back in. I'm so sorry. What was the question about the concern about the
Just a concern about the timing of when a developer could come in to apply for bond 4% financed projects. How would that be impacted?
Oh, okay. So what the goal would be, they would, if we do make this change, they would have a downtime. So from the time we approve the QAP till the new app is ready, because we have to adjust for the changes, there will be a downtime for them. Depending how fast we can get it out, that's what would happen.
Do you have any ballpark estimate of what that time delay might be?
We could work on that, Director Mackler.
Yeah.
We have capacity limitations right now, which we're working on. So right now, I think, kind of unfair to ask Jocelyn, but I will get back to you. I'll work with staff to do that.
Thank you. And this question is for Janice. This has to do with using zoning as a minimum threshold
Yes.
for 4% projects. I think you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the benefits of that would be that were there conditions that were imposed during the zoning process that were cost sensitive, that those types of costs could be addressed at the time of the financing request, so that those costs are actually revealed and known to the developer?
Yes.
That's okay.
That's an accurate statement. Yes.
So we might see fewer requests for increases, perhaps by identifying more of the project costs before the applications are submitted. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Right. Thanks, Gary. Anybody else? No, I just want to reiterate what Janice said, and thank you to the staff and the committee members and definitely the developers for their candid input. I mean, it is a process. It's still going, but I just want to thank everybody. Everybody's doing a great job. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Chair Mendy.
So I guess we'll just file that report and move on to item number 5. Overview of findings and recommendations from the Aloha Home Study.
Thank you, Chair. let's see. Oh, I see Kenna. I'm just looking at my screen to see who's here. I'd like to turn, okay, I'd like to turn this over, Chair, to Gavin Thornton, who is the Executive Director of Hawaii Appleseed, who will maybe introduce the project team as well. And then I understand Kenna is going to go through the presentation. Yeah, so Gavin.
Thank you very much, Janice. Kenna, do you want to go ahead and put the slides up?
Sure. Let's, hopefully this works for everybody. Can everyone see these? Hold on, present mode. Can everyone see these slides? Is it working?
Yes.
Yep. You can see it.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Gavin Thornton. I'm the Executive Director of the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, and our Hawaii Budget and Policy Center and Kenna led the work on this study, along with a team of people, some of whom you'll get to meet shortly. I really just wanted to start by thanking HHFDC for the opportunity to work on the Aloha Home study and for the opportunity to speak with you all today. You know, this is an issue that is near and dear to our hearts, the housing affordability issue, as it is to most residents in Hawaii. The inadequacy of housing for Hawaii's families is one of the most defining public policy issues of our day. High housing costs are the primary reason for why Hawaii's families are struggling to make ends meet, for why so many families are moving away from the state, and why we have such high homelessness rates. And this isn't a recent problem. It's been with us for decades. In fact, you know, Hawaii proclaimed a housing crisis 50 years ago. And since that time, it's only gotten worse. Indeed, if you look at what's happened in the housing market just over the last year, as the median single family home price on Oahu increased by nearly $50,000, you know, with a 20% down payment requirement, a home buyer needs to save an additional $10,000 just to keep up with the pace of home price increases. They need to save more to actually make progress.
Anti-democratic behavior, calling America hypocritical. Here's what the Chinese government.
I'm sorry, if someone could mute their mic. Thank you. So people actually need to save more than that to make real progress on owning a home. And I think one of our study's focus group participants shared something very apropos to that. I've been saving for years, but it's just not enough. And you could sense the frustration that that participant and other people have. You know, the average household just can't save enough to keep up, and home ownership gets further and further out of reach. So to address the crisis, Hawaii needs to do something dramatically different than what we've done in the past. And minor tweaks and changes that we've made have not slowed the momentum toward increased unaffordability. We need course-changing interventions. The Aloha Homes concept that we were asked to study proposes a large-scale shift in how we are addressing the housing crisis. It proposes investment in housing at a scale that would make an impact. And so with the problem of this scope, we really do need big visionary ideas, and we need them to be feasible. So this study provides a detailed examination of the Aloha Homes proposal, which is based on a housing model from Singapore. The study provides analysis and recommendations regarding which of the Aloha Homes components are feasible and which are unlikely to work in the Hawaii context. The study also provides recommendations regarding potential alternative strategies, looking at examples in other jurisdictions that have robust and effective housing policies, such as Vienna and Helsinki. So just briefly, Kenna, if you could switch the slide. The team that did the majority of the work on this study included members with local and regional experience in housing policy, real estate finances, legal analysis, state housing policy and urban development. The entire project team is listed here. Many more people were involved than are listed here, but these are the leads. And then the folks that will be speaking to you today are highlighted at the top there. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the first person that will be talking with you, Abby Seitz. But before I do, thank you again for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to your questions at the end of our presentation here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gavin. And thank you to the board for having us today. To present the material from our Aloha Home study, today we'll be sharing with you our study methodology as well as a background on Singapore's housing model. We'll also be discussing the financial feasibility of the Aloha Homes program, as well as options for maintaining affordability. We'll be discussing other program elements of the Aloha Homes program. And lastly, we'll be discussing the benefits, next steps, and conclusions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to prepare this analysis of the Aloha Homes program, we first started by reviewing existing studies, plans, as well as programs that are relevant to affordable housing, particularly those that are relevant to state-supported affordable housing models. We also analyzed 2 different case studies of Helsinki and Vienna that we'll be discussing shortly. We conducted 40 different interviews with experts in housing policy, including developers, different housing agencies, as well as community organizations, both locally and abroad. And lastly, we conducted 4 different focus groups with local residents who were interested in the Aloha Homes program and may be interested in participating in the future. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kenna.
Thank you. So since this proposal was inspired by Singapore, we first went to look at the Singapore model, which is unique in that it's very much based on leasehold ownership. So 80% of people live in state-supported housing. They have 99-year leases. The state basically finances the construction of them. And then residents have some pretty typical restrictions. There's an income limit for a new home purchase. You have to be a resident, no other property. And they also, many unique feature to Singapore, have very strict ethnic quotas for how many people can be in a building. And it was to promote social harmony in Singapore, and they've stuck to it. 2 of the elements of the Singapore model which would not work well in Hawaii is cheap labor. They rely on immigrant labor that has very few rights and is much less well paid than what we would want for our workers here in Hawaii. Therefore, their construction costs are less than half of Hawaii's. It's about $150 a square foot in Singapore. They also, not surprisingly, have a very strong state government that does not have the same level of citizen involvement in land use decisions. And so they are able to build things much more easily and quickly than what we're used to in a typical Western democracy. Here's a good slide that demonstrates that, which is the amount of units they're building per year. And basically, by creating enough supply, this keeps the prices stable. So their average resale price of these units has basically stayed flat for the past 6 years. And that's the red line. And the reason their sales price stays flat is because they just keep building more. So they always have enough supply. As you can see, in 2017, they built 30,000 units that year, right? So we decided to look at places that had more constraints similar to Hawaii. In other words, higher building costs and more citizen engagement in land use. and we found Helsinki and Vienna to be more similar to our situation in terms of governance and cost. So construction cost per square foot is very similar, $300 to $400 a square foot construction. And their citizens are highly engaged. They definitely have NIMBYism in both places. I put up a map here of a new city or a new neighborhood in Finland, because this is sort of their version of Kaka'ako. It was a waterfront area. And as you can see from the map, from the very beginning, they planned affordability into this, because they have, in purple is private market housing. And then in orange, we have a kind of a intermediate ownership model, but with a restricted price, sort of what we're proposing. So they have a public ownership, and then they have, of course, public rentals, which we're familiar with. But they make sure to have a mix in any new neighborhood. So just to further illustrate how we're a little more like Helsinki and Vienna than Singapore, these are the number of train stations built per million people since 2000. As you can see, Singapore is way up there at 16, and Vienna and Helsinki and Hawaii are down more at 6. And I would argue that we've built more stations now than ever before. Taking that into account, one thing we learned from Vienna and Helsinki, and also here in Kaka'ako, is that it's very important to preserve affordable units and not let them be lost. So the Aloha Homes proposal basically has a 5-year affordability period, because after 5 years, you can sell for market price. That's the way the model is currently set up. So after 5 years, that home is lost, and it's no longer affordable to the next owner. And we had this issue in Kaka'ako. Many units were no longer affordably priced after 2 to 5 years to the next owner. So we started out with 1,800 below market homes, and now we're down to 600. And at this rate in Kaka'ako, there'll be less than 3% of all those new condos will be in an affordability period. So we will have 97% being sold for market price, which we know is not affordable to most Hawaii residents. So we are recommending that we do not do that, but that instead we restrict the resale price. And the owner still makes equity. So the first question people say is, if you restrict the price, they won't make equity. Not true, not true. We did the models. Here's the Aloha Homes current model. If you bought a condo for $400,000 today, in 10 years, you could sell it for market, which would be about $750,000. That's a lot, because that's our real estate market. And in Aloha Homes, 75% would go to HHFDC. So HHFDC would get $260,000, okay? And the owner would keep about 90 grand. Okay, so the owner keeps 90, HHFDC gets 260. The problem with this model is that, as we know, you can't exactly take 260 and replace that unit. You can't take that amount of money and build the unit that you lost, and especially not in that same location. You have to get land, you have to get permission. It's a long process, which is why those units from Kaka'ako really have not been replaced, the ones that we've lost. So our proposal is a best practice from other places, which is that you restrict the price based on inflation, or it could be based on AMI, but we did it based on inflation. So that owner 10 years later would sell that home that they got for a discount, they would sell it for 500. So that owner would still keep 100 grand, but the next person gets an affordable home. And this is what creates a lasting affordability. So that's one of our main recommendations of changes for the Aloha Homes proposal. And now we'll get into the finances. What is feasible? Aloha Homes, as we all know, discusses a $300,000 price for a 2-bedroom. We found that to not be feasible, but we did find that there are significant cost savings. So there's 4 ways to save costs. Probably none of these are a surprise to anyone here, but there's state land contributions, There's offsite infrastructure, which should not be all on the project budget, but most of that should be part of a larger plan. There's, of course, streamlining entitlement. There are EA waivers that affordable homes can use, and financing access. We spoke with some people in California that are financing affordable housing through taxable mortgage revenue bonds. So mortgage revenue bonds can pay for construction and not come out of the general fund budget and not be an obligation of the state of Hawaii. So those 4 things brought us to these prices, which is higher than Aloha Homes proposes, but still below market. So for a 1-bedroom, it comes in at about $300,000, which is a 24% savings from market. For a 2-bedroom, it's about $400,000, a 30% savings. And of course, for 3-bedroom, it's about $500,000. There's a range given here, mostly to do with parking. It does depend on how much parking you provide. And it depends on if parking is part of your mortgage or if you pay for it separately with a monthly fee. So depending on parking, there's a kind of a range of prices there. All right. So the good news is that this would serve the 80 to 140% AMI range. It would be affordable to people at those incomes, but it would be more expensive than is proposed in Aloha Homes. And now some other program elements. Offsite infrastructure, we got a lot of questions about, well, how do you pay for that? Well, generally, and whether it was Singapore, Helsinki, Vienna, or other places with good affordable housing, they have a public plan to pay for that, generally out of property taxes, but sometimes out of a sales tax or an income tax. In Vienna, people pay a 1% extra tax on their income, and that pretty much funds a lot of their affordable housing policy. So it can be done in different ways. We are proposing a property tax assessment on new development that's market rate. And we did some calculations about how a property assessment on new development that's market can actually subsidize the infrastructure for everybody. And so you don't have to add a tax to the affordable. Another proposal that's been put out by a study was to do a GET increase. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Stephen, who helped lead and set up our focus group. So he's going to talk about some information we got from our focus groups.
Thanks, Kenna. So I'm going to go through a few components of the elements of the program. So for one, in the original bill, we talked about owner occupancy enforcement. So these units are intended to be owner occupied. And one of the ways of enforcing it that were discussed was using high-tech approaches, so biometrics, so using a facial or iris scan. This one, okay. We've discussed this with our focus groups, and many of our focus group participants found this a little invasive and concerned for privacy. They also had issues with technology being used and the potential of consequences if it fails or if there's like a shortage or outage, and the troubles it might cause them. So a recommendation for this, for owner occupancy enforcement, is actually to have a stewardship specialist. So this is what most community land trust and other IZ programs use. So rather than having someone managing the security system, they employ someone to either both manage the owner occupancy as well as negotiating the resale, ensuring that owners have, like first-time homeowners, are able to navigate their way through the homeownership process. And this is funded by a monthly fee that's assigned to each unit. Another component was having a discussion on preferences versus set-asides for special interest groups. So in our focus groups, we found that most participants were more agreeable to a set-aside rather than a preference. One concern was that housing should be an equal opportunity to everyone. And so a set-aside is fine, but preference might lead to some imbalance. Another best practice that we discussed was having income limits. So in the original proposal, there was a proposal for having no income limits, but we found that most other jurisdictions do impose them as a best practice. usually within the 80 to 150% AMI range. And even Singapore does have limits for their new constructed affordable homes. For our proposal, we're proposing that it goes up to 140%. After speaking to a land trust in Maui, we realized that for 2 public sector workers, they would come up just above the 120%, and that would take them away from potentially having their own unit.
Stephen, let me just jump in for a second and let somebody know the notes that you're taking on our slides are showing up for everybody. It reminds me of I don't know if folks saw the kitten filter in the court hearing, but just be aware of that. The Hawaii revised statute note and stuff, if you could maybe take that off, that would be helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
Thank you. Do you want to go to the next? Okay. And another best practice we found was actually having future tenant involvement in the planning process. So this is a best practice we found in Helsinki and Vienna, where the community members actually have a say in how their units are designed. And when we're discussing this with our focus group participants, they were almost all in agreement that they wanted to have a voice and say in how their units and community would be, amenities would also be laid out. There was also some interest in having a sweat equity portion where they could add finishing touches to their units in exchange for both a community development and also to assist in their mortgage down payment. And we have a local example of this, of tenant involvement in Puhanoa, Owainai, and this is a local project that had their tenants say in it. Next. And yeah, and one last component. So another concern that we discussed was having leasehold housing. So one concern we actually encountered was many of our participants in our focus groups were wary of having a leasehold. They were they preferred at least a fee simple model much more. But after discussing that this would be a state managed project, and it's just a matter of educating them on leaseholds. And most of our participants were more agreeable to it or interested in it. They saw it more as a middle way and a halfway point between renting and owning their actually own fee simple home. And there are some benefits we found from this that they all kind of agreed on. So it's stable, their monthly payments are fixed, they don't have to deal with rent increases, landlord issues. There is financial gain to be gained from this. They do get a return on their mortgage and some equity gain. And they also have the ability to pass this on to their children. And with that, I'm gonna pass it off to Professor Chang. Professor Chang, you're muted.
My apologies. Good morning. One of the most important issues in our study was the attempt to reconcile 2 important considerations. These were first, as can be seen, the contribution of state lands is essential to lowering the costs to provide affordable housing. However, second, the concern of Native Hawaiian organizations and individuals that this project does not deplete the lands held as a public trust by the state of Hawaii. Thus, the Aloha Home proposal in section 1, subparagraph 3, authorizes the Hawaii Housing and Development Corporation to sell Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation to sell the leasehold interests in residential condominium units on state lands for lease terms of 99 years. This use of the word sale has raised significant concerns with the Native Hawaiian community, particularly OHA. Their concern is whether these dispositions, the sale encumbers or encroaches upon the corpus of the public land trust. This is not to say that Native Hawaiians recognize the value of having affordable housing. They do. Native Hawaiians, like all persons, can use affordable housing. Indeed, given the unique importance of Native Hawaiians connecting with Aina, we might say the importance of preventing the flight of Native Hawaiians from Hawaii is even more significant than other groups. For a Hawaiian outside of Hawaii has a difficulty being Hawaiian, and a Hawaiian outside of, and a Hawaii without Hawaiians would be, how do you call it, Hawaii. So our study attempted and sought to obtain as much public and community input as possible, but we feel that the Aloha program has to involve Hawaiians and Native people, as well as other individuals, in a deep way to be complete. These two concerns are two of the most important things in our study. And now I would like to pass it along to Arjuna.
Thank you, Professor. So benefits, next steps, and conclusions. So the Aloha Homes program mainly benefits middle-income peoples who can't afford to buy at the private market. So that's between 80 to 140% AMI. Currently, the demand is around 5,000 households. It's a middle step between renting and ownership, and there are significant benefits over renting, such as equity building, as well as maintaining affordability. And as we heard from a community land trust in Maui, it's a nice step between going from renting, you take this middle step, and then on to market rate housing. Who's left out? So people under 80% AMI need further assistance, and that's about half of the housing need in Hawaii. Over half.
And you're muted.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Arjuna. We have a lot of presenters because we had a lot of people on this team, and so in fact, half of the folks are listening in to answer questions. So next steps on this would be to work out details of stewardship, because it's not so easy as you just sell the unit and then it stays affordable and it will manage itself. So HHFDC would need to contract with some kind of third-party management, similar to like what the Maui Land Trust does. There are other groups that could probably do it, but there would need to be a third-party management, which leads to number two, which is the importance of maintaining long-term affordability. If you're gonna build these units next to a train station or in some area that's really good for housing, then we need to make sure it stays affordable, because it's just so hard to replace. And the third thing is to dig more into finance options that are much more quick and low cost, such as mortgage revenue bonds. We had some good discussions with people using these in California for middle income housing. So they're using mortgage revenue bonds right now to create housing for 80 to 140% AMI. And it is not it's limited obligation. So nobody's on the hook for it except for the investors who have a mortgage interest in that development. So that could be a good way to reduce finance costs. And then of course, as Professor Chang was talking about, more consultation has to be done with various state departments, because there are concerns about long-term leases on state lands. So, but our overall conclusion, here we go. So the overall conclusion, though, is our focus groups showed there are many people who are looking for a middle path, who, even if it's not going to be fee simple, it would be so much better than their current rental situation, and they would be very interested in some sort of leasehold program. The second thing is that it can be done without using more general fund revenue. So it's not exactly free. It takes state land. It takes resources in terms of managing the project, and I'm sure it will take staffing to make something like this happen, but it doesn't need to cost a lot of general fund money. And then, so lastly, there are elements of this proposal that could fulfill this important housing need. And we will be posting the study shortly after this meeting. So I encourage people to look there for more of the details and data citations. But I do want to open it up for questions and see if there's any particular things that stand out or just comments people have.
Thank you, Kenna. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Kara, if I may ask 2 questions.
Sure.
What was the total number of participants in your focus groups? And then I'll follow that up so that for efficiency, what was the demographic makeup?
The total number of participants was 18. And the demographic makeup, Stephen has those exact numbers. Stephen, are you able to pull that up?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now.
So I will say of the 18, 14 were income qualified, ready to, you know, they could get into this program right now. The other 4, because we had such a big amount of interest of people who wouldn't be able to get a mortgage right now at our pricing, we still did 4 with some lower income folks in case there could be a rent to own model. I know LIHTC has sometimes done rent to own in the past. So, but in terms of, you're probably speaking to ethnic demographics. Is that what you're referring to?
My apologies. No, it was more so on the income demographics, but age, you know, would also be of interest to me. Just, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so the income definitely was between 80 to 120% AMI. That was our demographic for 14 of them. And then there were 4 that were in the 60 to 80 range or lower income range. And then Stephen, I know he has the age data.
Yeah, the average age of our participants was 42.
And do you have the range?
Range, yeah, 1 second. Our youngest was 27 and our oldest was 61.
Thank you.
Here, I have a question. So earlier today in today's agenda, we approved a time extension for the Haliwai'olu project, which is very close to starting to break ground on their project. This is a 17-story high-rise in Chinatown, 156 units of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Their current budget is $548,000 per unit. That's total development cost. Looking at the proposed Aloha Homes legislation, which talks about development being revenue neutral and that units would be priced to be affordable to households with incomes at 80% of AMI, paying no more than $10,000 as a down payment and having a monthly mortgage payment of no more than $1,500 per month. We're looking at a potential loan amount of about $355,000 to purchase a unit. Given the loan amount potential of $355,000 per unit and what is most likely going to be a much higher development cost to produce the unit, have you looked at where those development subsidies would come from and tried to pro forma how much that would cost?
So you're saying these, I just want to be sure I'm understanding the question.
Okay.
Which is that, have we done pro forma analysis on the pricing without general fund revenue, right?
Yes, because the cost to produce a unit is whatever that cost is, and the price to purchase a unit, I would submit, is going to be substantially below the cost to produce the units. So there's going to be a, there's going to be a subsidy that's going to have to come in to make those units available at that price point. So
Yeah.
you have an idea or a thought about where the subsidy can come from?
Oh yeah, so we did a very detailed pro forma analysis based on construction costs in Hawaii and different fees, and our detailed pro forma analysis for a 2-bedroom without general fund revenue, but with state land being contributed, right, and minimal offsite infrastructure cost was $400,000. So the unit can be built cheaper than I think in some current development practices. Partly, LIHTC units are very complicated financing structures. We talked to several developers who talked about having to wait years and do their own research and get their own parcel of land, and having a long pre-development period. So the pricing that we were basing our pro forma on was if the land is there, the project is there, and really you're mostly just paying for construction and some soft costs. So
basically vertical costs, you're looking mostly at vertical costs, if I understand you.
Yeah, mostly at vertical costs with, a developer fee in there, and of course the insurance and construction management, all those sort of things. But
I'm sorry to interrupt. The reason I'm asking that question is because the Haliwai-Olu project is on city and county land. So there isn't a substantial land cost to this project, and yet the total development budget is over $500,000 per unit. So, I understand that the contribution of state land is significant to keep the costs lower, but we're still looking at a very high development cost in today's market per unit. And looking at your number, if it's only based on primarily on vertical costs with some soft costs, I think it might be understated in a way because of what we're looking at with other projects that are coming through the corporation for financing. And I guess it kind of makes me question whether the model that's currently proposed can be replicated effectively, given the economics of what it takes to develop in Hawaii.
Yeah, so I don't know the details of that particular project, but I would assume it might have had a fairly long pre-development, or I'm wondering, was there direct competition for that particular project in terms of like an RFP being put out to say, okay, here's the project, here's what we want. Now let's put out an RFP and see who can compete at the lowest price. Because I think that generally LIHTC doesn't work in that model. But I'm not sure about the specifics for that project.
Well, I will submit that each project has its own unique requirements and costs, and they do vary significantly from project to project and from project type to project type. But I'm just looking at this most recent example that was on our agenda today, and it makes me question whether we're realistically pricing the cost per unit, development costs per unit at this time, and it is a concern of mine because if we're going to restrict the sales price through legislation, I think we're going to be dealing with a very large subsidy at the end of the day.
Oh, well, I do want to turn this over to Dave or Charlie because they really were the experts on our pro forma analysis. But I want to say about the price restriction, the first sale price is set at the cost. So there's no subsidy on the initial sale because that's just set on the cost to repay for the unit. It's only on the second sale. Further sales have a restricted price to keep it affordable for the next owner. So that's they call it the cost recovery principle, and that's what they use in Vienna and Helsinki, which is that they recover full cost of that unit. It's just that they preserve affordability in the future.
Kenna, let me make a clarification, if I could, from Mr. Mackler. And I think that is that the study determined that what was proposed under the Aloha Home statute was not, in fact, feasible. And so what Kenna's talking about, what she's describing, is an alternative recommendation. Am I right about that, Kenna?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that, looking at other models, because I think the overall driving concept of bringing higher density, utilizing state lands, tying that to transit is all has great merit, and trying to find a path forward is I think what we're all trying to do. And I appreciate your work.
Dave or Charlie, did you want to, are either of you there and would want to comment more on our performa analysis?
I can comment, Kenna.
Hi,
I'm Charlie Long. I'm a real estate developer and done a lot of public-private partnerships, both as a private developer as well as been a city manager 4 places. So I've been on both sides of the table. And our analysis of the costs associated with the affordable housing for sale program is based upon some discussion, a lot of discussion, frankly, with developers in Hawaii about what they're really experiencing in terms of costs. I just finished 175 apartments in Oakland, California, which has the highest construction costs in the world. Not that we're bragging about it, but the recommendations that we're making basically ask HHFDC to move ahead with a different model for developing affordable housing than is currently used with the LIHTC. Because the LIHTC program frequently is filled with significant amounts of delays, very, very high developer fees, and a lot of waiting around for the financing to get approved. What we're suggesting is that the process can result in much lower cost per unit, to the extent that, one, the entitlement is streamlined as part of the project being part of a master plan around a transit station. Two, that the land is basically put into the project at no cost through a lease of that land. And three, that the financing is available more straightforwardly through mortgage revenue bonds that can be available at the point at which the project is ready to construct. And compared to the costs that I just experienced in the highest construction cost market in the country, the costs that we've put into this pro forma are completely at the right scale in terms of delivering housing at an affordable price.
The other thing I'll add to that is the other component, and Kenna already alluded to this, is
Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry. Dave Frudenberger, Goodwin Consulting Group, public finance consultants, been in business about 20 years, been doing business in Hawaii for about 14 of those. The other relatively big cost savings feature or suggestion relates to the offsite infrastructure. So whether this development you're referring to in Chinatown either had to build offsite infrastructure or had to pay development impact fees towards that, that's probably a fairly large component of that cost that we're recommending other financing tools and or state and our county contributions, again, towards this larger master planned approach under which affordable housing projects would either be exempt or pay a much smaller portion of that.
Thank you, Dave. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
And I guess one more, sorry to interrupt, one more clarification is that, yeah, the pro formas that were run, again, as Ken mentioned, are detailed, and they consider every cost you would expect to incur as part of a development like this. It's just that some of those costs are assumed to be zero or a lot lower, namely infrastructure, outside infrastructure, and land costs, or they're lower because the process is streamlined. Or in the case of financing, we're actually with this revenue bond, mortgage revenue bond financing, proposing at or near a zero equity contribution. All of those things lead to a more efficiency, they lead to less cost, and they also in turn lead to a lower requirement for a developer fee, which in turn reduces costs even further.
Right.
So I had a question then, kind of following up on Gary's. So would you consider your estimates conservative on the low side, or right in the middle, or you put in some padding there?
There are definitely contingencies, small, but there are contingencies built into the pro forma, and I'll let Ken elaborate on this. But we have done enough research, local research, to feel like we're clearly not on the high side, but we're not on the low side either. We're probably somewhere in the middle, and there are going to be some projects that are going to be higher than what we're showing as an average, and there are going to be some that are lower.
Can I make one comment? This is Charlie Long again. I've mentioned that I've been on both sides of the table, and it's a lot of work to manage effectively a public-private partnership. And these are, in fact, public-private partnerships. And there needs to be a validation that the fees that the developer puts in are, in fact, fair. And so we saw some of the pro formas for the LIHTC projects, and I was frankly somewhat surprised at the level of developer fees that were in those projects. And so what we're suggesting is that this program essentially basically put together a fair and validated fee schedule for the developers that do these projects, one, and two, that there should be a selection process based on the qualifications of the developer, the competence, trustworthiness, and qualifications of the developer. That's second. And third, that the state basically manage this program in a way that streamlines the approval process and the financing process so that the developer is not sitting around waiting for the money and the entitlement.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up that we did speak with Jordan Moss, who runs Catalyst Housing Group in California, and he has done over $500 million worth of affordable housing financed in similar to what we're proposing, where it's a mortgage revenue bond. He gets it project by project, he gets project approval, and then he has that financing literally 3 months later. And then it gets paid back as soon as the units are leased up. So, it is being done, and it's not, $400,000 for a 2-bedroom is not going to solve everyone's housing needs, but it is much better than what you can get on the private market. So, yeah, we have gone round and round, and really we tried to pick the middle number. Every time there was a range, we picked the middle number. We didn't pick the lowest, we didn't pick the highest, we went middle.
Okay, thank you. I just kind of wanted to get a feel for where you got, because I know you're mentioning that the proposal was unfeasible, right? So I just kind of wanted to gauge where that was coming from. And thank you for that information.
may I ask, just to get a better understanding of the design, is there a standard size you are using or for each of the
Oh,
units?
yeah.
I mean,
So let me go back. I think I had a slide about, so here's oh, whoops. Sorry. We have, it's in the full study, but yeah, so for a 1 bedroom, 1 bath, it was 600 square feet. For 2 bedroom, 2 bath, it was 830 square feet. And for a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, it was 1,000, which is fairly actually normal for Hawaii urban areas, right?
yes, thank you.
I can stop this screen share.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah,
Or
Chair, I got a question. Kenna, you know, in your study, you include the future tenant involvement, which you include the pool, Ho'onua, OYNI. So have they been in kind of active with your group? You know, we have very well, we have very strong ties with the leader out there, Miss Borge, and you know, we're very supportive of that new location that they got. So, you know, just kind of curious, are they been have they been active with being involved in your study?
No, not super active. They just they have an excellent example of future resident involvement. So we just wanted to highlight that. But we did read articles from and even talk to housing planners in Helsinki and in Vienna, and they find that incorporating the residents into things like what amenities they want or landscaping they want, or you know how much parking, that it actually adds value and saves costs sometimes too. You know, one thing that came up in our focus groups was people said, you know, we really want low HOA fees. We just want a place to hang out with some picnic tables and a barbecue. We don't want to pay for other fancy stuff. This is the level of amenities we want.
Well,
so,
you know, they acquired a 20-acre property, right, in on the west side of Oahu.
Yeah.
You know, so I have you, you know, kind of open up a dialogue with the leader of the group there.
Oh yeah, we have definitely been in touch with Twinkle and James Koshiba.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Good.
No, and even though what they're doing is very, very low cost, I think that there's elements of how they did it that could make sense even for, you know, a higher cost, you know, leasehold model.
You know, they finally may have found a home after being on the beaches at the Waianae Boat Harbor all these years. So yes, so whatever we can do to help Borge or Twinkles, yeah, we would really appreciate it. You know, I live on the west side. We're really supportive of what they're doing out there. But anyway, thank you.
Can I ask,
thank you.
Along those lines, if something doesn't go as you have planned, say the infrastructure is, you know, if it's a piece of land with no infrastructure and the costs are just enormous, in your full study, are there tweaks to the model that you suggest to, you know, to bring it back to this affordability, or is it just if we can't get those pieces, the project is scrapped?
I think there are potential land parcels that would be part of a bit, you know, to do one pilot project, right? To just do one, you would need to find a parcel of land that doesn't have a lot of offsite infrastructure costs. But you know, I've seen performas of LIHTC projects that had very few offsite infrastructure costs just because of where they were located, right? So I know that that's possible. But I think the power of the model is that it doesn't really need a lot of further subsidy. So I think it'd be best to find that parcel where you can do it and then kind of demonstrate that, hey, we can achieve the cost savings that make this attractive to local residents without needing to put in these extra subsidies, right?
Okay. Thank you.
And if I could just add real quickly, I mean, I think infrastructure is critically important. I think, can I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is an underlying assumption of that we need to invest more in infrastructure in order to be able to do this kind of housing affordability.
Yeah. Yeah, in Kalaloa, that's the key.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
George, you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in the Eva and Kalaloa side of the rail line, that whole infrastructure is a question mark. Where you have to end the line or stuff like that, and like the water system in the old Barbers Point was the Navy handled it, but they're changing it to the Board of Water Supply or to a private entity. It's going to affect which parcels will be wide open or not. Yeah, so that's a big question then.
Yeah, let me just, I found the place in the study that summarizes this. Let me just read it to you. Significant public investment in infrastructure is needed to enable housing construction in TOD areas at the prices proposed in this study. The public sector must take a larger role in this area.
Right.
And we propose using a community facilities district model to do that. It's very common. The downside is that it means that new private market people will pay a slightly higher property tax. And that's what it is. Like if you're buying in new and it's private market, not affordable, your property tax will be higher than the current very, very low rate of 1/3 of 1%. Right. On the other hand, the exchange is that infrastructure gets built and paid for. And then everybody in that area can then benefit from that infrastructure.
I agree.
So that's the model we put forward for how to cover that infrastructure. And I think it makes the most financial sense. There could be other constraints.
So Chair, if I can just conclude that I really want to thank the consultant team under the leadership of Appleseed for working with us to prepare this study. As you can see, the Aloha Homes model is not feasible in its entirety, but there are components of the model that can work, and the consultants here have expanded on that. They've done more research on that so that they'll help to see, how can we bring more affordable housing for middle income or low and moderate income families in Hawaii, especially on Oahu. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate all your
Thank
work.
you again, everybody at HHFDC, again, for the opportunity and the wonderful working relationship. Appreciate it very much. Thank you, Janice, for helping throughout.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Janice, and the consultant. I guess moving on to the last, is it the last section? Yeah. Overview by the executive director.
Aloha.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, directors. While we're on that subject, I just wanted to point out, because the question about and the mention of infrastructure costs, that the TOD Council has engaged, or Office of Planning has engaged with consultants to do a study on the infrastructure costs surrounding the TODs. And I believe there's a study online, the Red Book, maybe on the OP website. It's called DTA, TOD Financial Analysis. Just for the board's information, the estimated gross cost of regional project improvements around the 3 priority areas involving TOD stations came close to $5 billion. So infrastructure costs are pretty significant. That would involve huge subsidies on the part of both the city and the state, I believe. And ways to finance it just for phase 1 looks like it comes up, almost $2 billion. So if I'm reading this correctly. So just since we're on that subject, I thought I would share, there are some studies done that kind of does a broad assessment of the infrastructure costs, which are pretty significant and turns out to be a huge subsidy on the part of government. So just for information. I think we had a long meeting today. I just wanted to go over some important bills, unless directors, you had any questions on any of the reports submitted. I'd be happy to take them right now. Otherwise, I'm just going to go over a couple of bills. I have Mavis here to stand by for questions, but just real broadly, any questions on any of the reports submitted? Hearing no questions, I'm going to go into some of the key bills. First and foremost, I wanted to turn your attention to House Bill 757. And this bill actually replaces it affects our HHFDC board and replaces one of our public members with the DHHL chair. HHFDC is strongly opposed to this, of course. Why would we ever support something that unseats one of our knowledgeable and experienced members? So we are strongly opposed. The other one is House Bill 902. And I'm sorry, for House Bill 757, the Senate companion is Senate Bill 1322. And that's being heard next week. So if any of you would like to submit testimony, that would be great. House Bill 902 is our public lands bill. And this broadens and expands our current exemption from the definition of public lands to lands set aside to the corporation. So this would help streamline and shave off 6 to 9 months of the development process. House Bill 908 affects LIHTC. There are several LIHTC bills. I'm just going to go through one more before I turn it over to Mavis. But House Bill 1311 and the Senate companion, Senate Bill 607. This is the Kiawe Street apartment bill, and it removes the deadline, construction deadline, to preserve the $37 million in rental housing revolving funds that it was currently committed by this board for this project. And it's in jeopardy now because of the new standards being applied by SHPE, for which we got notice very late last year. So I'm going to turn it over to Mavis to cover a few other significant bills. Good morning, Mavis Masaki. I'm the lunch coordinator for the agency. Denise covered kind of the highlights, but we're overall tracking about 208 bills. Our main priority are.
Hello. Can you speak up a little bit? It's
I apologize. We are currently tracking about 208 bills that affect housing and issues. Our main priority are our admin package, which includes a public lands bill Denise went over, which has been scheduled for hearing on both the House and Senate side, either that bill or an equivalent bill. We also had a bill to exempt our longstanding lessees that seek to buy the fee from going through the legislative approval process.
Wait. So can you get those bill numbers?
Okay.
This is an important bill because throughout this whole process, we've been asked to coordinate and give more support for Native Hawaiians. On this bill that takes care of the remnant parcels that we have and helps these homeowners that have leasehold interest cross the finish line to home ownership. Some of them are Native Hawaiians. And last year, I got complaints from the Native Hawaiian community who are waiting to get the resolution passed, but we ran out of time, right? Session got short by COVID, we ran out of time. So this very bill helps Native Hawaiians too. So I want the board to know, this is important because there's a lot of desire being voiced for HHFDC to do more for Native Hawaiians. And I, as a Native Hawaiian, want to say we are doing stuff for Hawaiians. We get behind, measures like this specifically to push for Native Hawaiians. So I just want the board to know that we are doing it amongst other collaboration like the infrastructure improvements that we're doing for DHHL and Lealii and Lai'opo. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. The House bill number is House Bill 77, and it was passed out of the Committee on Housing on the House side on the 4th. The equivalent Senate bill, the admin bill number is Senate Bill 1057. There's also two other similar Senate bills, Senate Bill 689 and Senate Bill 1005. So we have a little bit more time for those to get scheduled. Let's see. The third admin bill was just to repeal obsolete homeownership programs, the down payment loan assistance program, and the Home Buyers Club program. The House version, House Bill 907, was heard this past week, and Senate Bill 1061 is being heard this afternoon. And the last admin bill was to extend the acceleration of the state low-income housing tax credits from 10 to 5 years for another 5 years. There are a lot of other bills affecting the tax credit program that also extend this. And those bills are moving. House Bill 80 includes a 6-year extension of that. Senate Bill 867 also has a 6-year extension. And Senate Bill 659 also includes that, among other changes to the LANTIC program. And then, as Denise said, the other major issue for us is that Keawe Street project, the 2022 deadline. House Bill 1311 and Senate Bill 607 were heard on both sides. So we're hopeful that that will go through and financing will be secured for that project. Overall, those are our main things, and we're just sort of monitoring to kind of get a sense. There's a lot of new legislators, and we're trying to get a sense of where the policy priorities are. There's also a lot of measures that look at sort of realigning, reorganizing government, and we're watching those as well, because they will have implications for our agency.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mavis hasn't had a decent night of sleep since session began. I also wanted the board to know that I have regular meetings with the CEO of OHA. We try to meet at least a couple of times a month, just to kind of kuka, talk stories, see where we can engage and work together on projects. So that's it for our report. Directors, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on any subject matter.
Thanks, Denise. Does anyone have anything else that they want to bring up?
Sure, I got a question.
Sure.
Denise, that House bill that you're looking at adding Department of Hawaiian Homeland Share. So I know when they left the committee, they made an amendment.
Yes.
They're looking at possibly adding two more.
Two seats to the board, and
Yes.
our position remains the same, Director. We think that the DHHL has enough on its plate. We do provide funding that supports DHHL, so there may be some conflicts when it comes time to voting. In reading some of the testimonies from other Hawaiian organizations on some of DHHL's proposal, it appears that they have a lot of funds currently within their budget. And there's been some questions about capacity to process what they have. So best use of their time, just in my humble opinion, is to focus on DHHL matters, bringing down the wait list. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, very good. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know how they would be actually. Why? I'll just leave it up to the Senate committee. I talked to Representative Daniel Holt on several occasions, and I guess he's going to leave it up to the Senate and see what kind of changes that they're going to make, whether they're going to defer or hopefully they kill the bill in the Senate committee.
Thank you, Director. Your voices are important, so any of you
yes
or submit testimony, that would be helpful. I really think we should let DHHL concentrate on their kuleana, because if you add two members, that invites another organization, that another public member that could bring unwanted, unnecessary controversy.
Yes, we'll get more actively involved, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we've been kind of like following this bill, and we're kind of surprised that Department of Hawaiian Homelands wants to be part of this, the board of directors. Right? Anyway, we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kahane. Any further questions?
No?
Thank you, Chair.
All right, so I guess if there's nothing else, so get a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Thanks, Mel.
Second.
Thanks, George.
Second.
All in favor? We
are
adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gungi Fatroy.